Hi, everybody. This is Kunal Nayak here again. I'm from Growmore Immigration, and I have a special guest today, Rhea Fawole. She is from Solvi Migration. She is a founder and a CEO of Solvi Migration. And before I give her introduction, I would like to request Rhea to introduce herself. Hi, Rhea. Welcome to our show.
Hello, it's an absolute delight to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you
So,
for
as you were
joining
saying, I'm
us.
Rhea Fawole, and I'm the principal lawyer for Solvi Migration. It's a relatively new immigration legal practice, but I come from, as we like to say to our clients, I come from the dark side. I've spent 12 years working in the Australian Immigration Department, and now I'm using my
Right.
powers for good.
That's great. That's great.
Thank you.
Uh,
That's
so yes, you're you're saying it's a dark side, but we want to see that as a bright side. So I have a lot of questions that, from my clients and other people as well about the department, how it works, how. So could you please, if, focus some light on that? How is the other side? You've been a director of Department of Home Affairs for 12 years, right? And within your journey to working with the department, how was it? How it works? Could you please let our listeners know how it works?
I think one interesting thing is obviously the department has gone through a lot of transformations over the years. So I got to experience those working on the inside of the department. Um, the Australian Department of Immigration has had lots of different names. It's taken responsibility for visas and migration consistently and citizenship. Sometimes there was also broader multicultural affairs
Hmm.
type programs that it was looking at. For a period of time, it also looked at Indigenous affairs.
Yeah.
So there's been some interesting transitions, and then combined with the customs. So that now is kind of how it operates, taking into account those two things. So in terms of my experience, I worked in policy and programs, and I also worked in the legal team, so training visa decision makers how you make those decisions. I also worked in a former immigration minister's office in Parliament House in a role as a departmental liaison officer, right through to identity and biometrics, which is kind of the intelligence side of the department, looking at documentation. In terms of how it operates, an interesting fact that most people don't know is probably only about 5% of people who are employed by the department would ever process a visa or have any idea about how to process a visa.
Really?
That's true. There is a lot that
Wow.
goes into the
That's fun.
administration.
Oh my God. Okay. Right.
So the
Right.
people that if people call up the phone line to try and find out about their immigration case, you'll
Yeah.
often hear from clients now, they had no idea what they're talking about. Well, that's because
Correct.
the people who answer the phones are not visa decision makers. So they're not going to be involved in assessing anyone's case. They get trained high level on what the different types of visas might be, and then encourage people to go and serve themselves. So that probably explains, what we will hear from our clients. I tried. I was on that 13 number and I never got a response. That's because you're not speaking to the visa decision maker. And I think that's it's helpful for you and I with our clients. Um, there's a perception that we're able to just reach into the department and speak to someone about their case. But the department deals with such a high volume, and they move processing and decision making from offices here in Australia, different overseas posts. So we as the professionals can guide all of our clients and look at their case and their how to navigate the pathway that they want. But we're not going to be able to pick up the phone in most cases to speak to someone in the department and say, "Hey, hurry up with this case. What are you
There you
doing?"
go.
Which is, the client expectation because they maybe have heard that's how things used to happen. Not for
Yeah.
decades now. A couple of decades ago, it stopped.
Very true. Absolutely right. And see, this is the most challenge in our profession, that client expect faster processing and on-time processing, while the other side, the department is not doing that. I don't know it's deliberate or non-deliberate. It depends on the policies. So In that case, what, as a migration agent or as a lawyer, what is my job? What should I do to make my client understand that this is something beyond my control?
The real thing is that they need to understand that we are professionals. I know that both you and I would have done years of study to obtain our qualifications, and then we also work with other colleagues and professionals to understand how to navigate the rules, and that those rules change on a weekly basis. We will get new sets of rules for different visas that we're constantly navigating. So I guess it's understanding that because we're trained to do that, we are going to get the fastest outcome. It may not feel like it to the client because they're wanting that quick action. But if you've got someone who understands the rules and understands the requirements, what documents and the expectations, they're going to make sure that your case has everything presented to the department in the correct format, and that is going to speed up the process. On top of that, we have subject matter knowledge around things like the ministerial directions, and I've talked about this in my own podcast as well. So,
Mhm.
Ministerial Direction 100 at the moment specifies the order of the different types of visa applications and which ones will be given priority. So I think it's important for people to speak to professionals like us to say, here is my situation, here are my immigration goals. Can you please advise me currently how long that's likely to take? And we can give an educated guess based on our knowledge of different countries, what their requirements might look like, their rates of compliance. That's going to impact the visa processing, and then being aware of the shifts that happen. And I think because in our professional community, we're able to talk to things like we're aware that currently visitor visas for people outside of Australia are being processed in China. That's different. And so we can make them aware of why the change, and then also to help prepare for clients. Right, so now you've got visa decision makers who are coming from a different cultural context and might have different expectations for how your application is presented. So we can help inform that to make sure that people get much higher rates of success in their cases.
Beautiful. So you just mentioned about your podcast. Could you please tell us more about your podcast? If somebody wants to listen, and what's that includes?
Yes, so it's actually only a few weeks old. It's called Making Australian Migration Easy. So the goal
Wow.
of my podcast is to look broadly for people and for people who actually want to take some time researching, okay, I want to go to Australia. How do I do this? They may already have skills to come to Australia. It's basically giving them the direction, okay, what type of skill assessment do you need? What type of English language test do you need? Or if you want to make a plan because you don't yet have those particular skills, what courses might you do in Australia? And I also focus on, from my professional experience in government, which particular industries consistently are available for permanent migration pathways. Because I think both you and I would know, some people may study something and maybe it's not a high enough quality, or
Yep.
maybe it's something that stops being on one of the skilled lists, and then
Hmm.
they suddenly go, okay, well, now I've paid all of this money for this course and don't have a pathway. So the focus of making Australian migration easy is to allow people to do the research to start to understand which particular industries consistently have always had good pathways and how to start researching to navigate those.
Right. Okay. So, see, I'm a pretty new migration agent and working in the industry for a long time. I was an education agent for 15 years, and I've been worked in other industries as well in Australia. But you've been consistently working with the department and all the government departments so far, most of them. And now you switch to your own business, running a law firm, which is immigration law firm. So, what made you to do that switch?
So for me, it was that personal experience. I worked in what they would say is the pointy end of the department towards the end of my career. I worked as a senior case manager in immigration detention facilities, and that's where people's immigration situations for Australian law had not gone well, and they're detained. That's a very challenging environment. And when you're dealing with other human beings there in a detention environment who obviously wanted certain outcomes for themselves, their lives, their families, um, as a human being, you can't leave that feeling behind. Each person that you deal with, you see, you hear them, you understand. So I wanted to, all of the marketing that you'll see around Solvi Migration is very positive and uplifting. It's around what you can do to migrate successfully.
Yeah.
I would see things that I would find, personally painful, where people had listened to the advice of others that were not
Hmm.
professionals. So you'll hear a lot of
Hmm.
people being told things like just apply for a protection visa and then you get
Yeah.
to stay longer. They don't
Hmm.
understand the complexities and what this does from a compliance to their immigration chances in Australia. And
Yeah.
being in immigration detention, that's where you saw it go particularly wrong. And then also working in identity and biometrics.
Hmm.
I can understand personally if you're in a home country where things are not ideal and you're used to uh, being able to purchase documents to meet certain requirements. But Australia has very strong identity and biometrics checking to check for counterfeit and fraudulent documents. And there are people using very complex technologies to identify these things at the border and in visa applications. And so I thought, to start Solvi Migration, I can use all of that knowledge, all of those skills to start informing people how to do it properly. Because as someone who comes from mixed heritage, I love that Australia is so multicultural and I want to help people to be able to come here the right way.
All right. Okay. Great. Great intention behind this. I would say law firm that you're having. Your knowledge and your experience is enormous, and whatever that your clients are, and I wish them best of luck, and I wish that they've made a best choice out of the entire immigration market. Where you go, then who the person who has that much of knowledge and experience managing your case, that's the best thing they can do. So please, everyone, if you want to reach out to Rhea, I have provided the link in the description, so you can reach out to Rhea as well. If that any complex cases, any student visas, migration, or what visas you offer, tell me that. What sort
So
of services your firm offer?
we we cover a wide range of services because people can come to you from a range of ways. You would know, having previously been an education agent, I do have a number of affiliates who are also education agents. And so someone may come and decide they want to study a course, student visa. That's first thing. We can help with that if you're coming from a country where there's difficulty. Then you might be finishing your course. Where to next? You might need a graduate visa, or if you've been doing some kind of training like construction type roles, you might need to do an apprenticeship. And so you need a training visa to make sure you get the right work experience to get a skills assessment. Uh, we will also help people with skills assessments. And then there's the skilled migration pathways. So that could be for temporary skilled migration, permanent migration, independent, the state and territory nomination, and of course citizenship. One area I don't our company isn't currently looking to is protection. Um, and that's, I do have a lot of subject matter knowledge, but I know that there's a lot of other colleagues who have a very specific focus on that. And it is, of course, a very important area. So I would happily refer people to other colleagues who very much focus in that particular area.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for all this information. Okay, so tell us that where you are located, where are your offices located?
That's the fun part. So we all know that COVID happened. And when COVID happened, a lot of people had to stay working inside. So this was another thing I decided with Solvi Migration. I was like, well, people are now used to dealing like we are having our discussion right now online. So We don't have physical offices, and that allows my team also to be able to work from home. You may see it as at events and other things that we will show up, or I might go out to. I've got some affiliations with some of uh, the registered training organisations in my area. I might go and talk to students there. But most of our consultations are done like this, so through Zoom, on phone, and so we tend to have a presence for the Gold Coast, Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne at the moment. But I certainly have clients offshore and other parts of Australia too.
Great, excellent, excellent. And that's the in the modern world. I think that should be in for specifically for our industry. This is the best part because we can work from home and we can provide all the services from anywhere in the world. And having office in one place is a different story, while serving the worldwide client base is a different story, right? So by having this Zoom consultation or online consultations, we can consult the clients all over the world, and that's I think that's the best way to do it. Thank you so much for that that insight. Okay, so I have some questions regarding Australian immigration from our clients or from online comments or anything. So how Australia see migrants or applicants as in a source of employment, source of skills, or source of just money making policy? How does that work?
So it is quite broad. So I guess if I explain first of all, so Australia, obviously, there's the federal government, and that's
Right.
looking nationwide. But then we have different states and territories, and each of
Mhm.
them have a government as well. Um,
Mhm.
they they operate together, but something that people from outside of Australia may not be aware of, we have elections in those different levels of government. So currently we have a Labor government operating federally, so they have certain policy objectives with migration and skills, and then states and territories, because they also have separate elections. You might have opposing parties who are actually governing that particular state or territory. So sometimes it can present a bit of a tension, but they do come together in the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings to agree. And that's where people will see things like the state and territory migration programs. So the way those two work together, I think that's probably the best program to discuss in this context. The federal government will go and look broadly at labour, look at with the Australian Bureau of Statistics, okay, which particular occupations are we seeing shortages of skills? And then from there, the different states and territories will look at that and say, well, within our state, this particular occupation is having more shortages. So the federal government will then sort of say, all right, New South Wales, Queensland, Tasmania, all of the different jurisdictions, you can have an allocation of this many visas, and then people from there, the different jurisdictions will choose which occupations they're going to invite visas.
Mhm.
People need to have put in their expression of interest for that particular jurisdiction, and they'll need to meet a points requirement. So this is the General Skilled Migration Program.
Program.
There will
Yeah.
be English language requirements. There will be skills assessment requirements. You'll need to get police checks, health checks, all of those other things ready. Have your expression of interest, but then be aware, is the state that I wish to go to, do they want my occupation? And
Mm.
then they will invite in rounds. As a professional, it can get a little bit challenging because we don't get a lot of advance warning when those rounds are going to come and which occupations are going to be on those rounds. So we're
Correct.
always using our networks to keep on top of that on behalf of our clients. But in terms of, I guess, your broader question about whether or not Australia, as I guess a society, wants migrants, you only need to look at the statistics. We are founded on migration, absolutely. And that continues to be the pathway. Um, we do see fluctuations in certain nationalities increasing, and I think that that's exciting, and it might change a little. But under the current government, they certainly have recognised, the world has just been through a pandemic. Now we're seeing interest rates rising, but at the same time, that means then you've got higher salaries and more jobs that need to be filled. So we're seeing great prioritization of bringing in people with certain skills. So it is an opportune time in the next couple of years, if you wish to come to Australia, to kind of jump on that opportunity. And then, you know, you yourself, as someone who has migrated here, can speak to some of the benefits. Um,
Yes.
we have universal healthcare. We are able to, for families, there's great education standards. If you came here and became qualified, we have world leading education levels. So, for example, if
Yeah.
you work in the healthcare sector, you are going to be able to practice with those skills anywhere else in the world. So,
And
certainly a good choice. And I definitely like all the vitamin D that we get in our lifestyle by being here.
great. I used to be pharmacist. Yes. So excellent, excellent. And see, there is that gave me a sub question. When you just said that department gives the allocation to the state, and state says, okay, this is the occupation. These are the occupations we wanted in our state, and then they start nominating and they start rounds and all that. So uh, behind the scene, who decides those occupation? What are the thought process to decide those occupations? Could you please focus on that a little bit?
So that would be the actual policy officers. So federally, you will have people who sit in the Department of Home Affairs looking at, working with the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the
Mhm.
Department of Employment and Education to say, okay, with our labour market, where are we seeing those particular shortages? Fantastic. So what kind of numbers do we need broadly for our migration program? And that's where they sort of come up with the magical number for skilled migration. And then from there, there would be discussions with the states and territories who would have their own policy officers who would then also need to examine. They have local governments within the state governments who will then start talking to them about, well, here's the key shortages that we're having in our different areas within this state. And that's where they would determine, for example, the subclass 190, which is what a lot of clients want to go straight to because it's permanent residency. You will see fewer occupations on that list. And that's simply because as a government, you can appreciate if you give someone permanent residency immediately, they're then free to move and relocate wherever they wish to, and the state may not get the benefit of those skills. So that's why they limit the number of occupations that would actually be invited for that, and there's a lower number of those visas allocated. You will see more of the subclass 491, which is the up to 5 years, and it's
Mhm.
generally, again, caveat because they've had changes in Victoria, generally that would be for regional areas within the
Mhm.
state. Except
Right.
as we know, Melbourne decided 2 weeks ago that it was also going to be
The
regional.
metro as
Um,
well. Yes.
this is why you need us. We keep up with this. We can't tell our clients enough. we,
Correct.
we have to keep up
Correct.
with these changes. Um, and so then they would be looking in those different areas. You're going to have a higher chance because there will be more occupations for that subclass 491 because it's a temporary visa and you need to make a commitment that you are going to be in that state for a number of years, and you need to fulfill that time before you're then eligible to apply for permanent residency. So from a government perspective, they think that that's probably the best deal for them because then they get a commitment of actually having the skills in their jurisdiction, doing what they need to fill the labour shortages.
Right. Okay. Great. This question, next question, might be a little tricky, but does the political parties impact the immigration policies? Is there anything? Let's say Labour Party, Liberal Party, Greens, and all that, all different parties, whoever's in the power. do they impact the immigration? We have seen that, people are saying, a lot of newspapers saying that, okay, Liberal Party before, they just stopped the migration for a while, they limit the numbers and all that. Now Labour Party is in the drive, and they are driving it, they are trying to drive it, smoothly. So is it party specific policies as well, or it just country specific policies? How does that work?
So there are definitely country-specific policies that happen for immigration. You can always jump on websites of different political parties, and they will have their policies published there for people to view. In a
Mhm.
lead up to an election, for people who are citizens, it's important that they do that. I don't know that
Yep.
they always do, but that's where you can find out about those. And now I'm going to be a little bit controversial, but also apolitically. If you have a look at the cycles of migration, um, and the number of people who are able to migrate, uh, it doesn't appear to be tied to a specific political party. So, from a messaging standpoint, for example, I can recall a time when the Howard government came in, and because there was a lot of criticism around the treatment of asylum seekers who were arriving by boat, um, the public perception was that it was a very anti migration party. But then in the background, if you look at the statistics of the migration program, there was actually a steady increase of the number of people who they were allowing to migrate. So there's this kind of juxtaposition of what happens in the messaging out to the world and some of the policies that can impact human beings and how in difficult circumstances. But when you look at a migration program and its numbers, it doesn't appear to be tied to the party overall. Yes, I don't want to, as I said,
No, no,
dehumanize
that's
the
perfectly
people who are
fine. I
going
understand. Yeah.
through the actual experience, because it certainly does impact individuals at the time. But yes, when you have a look at the statistics for migration, um, when it says that they stopped, you can have a look that things stopped everywhere because there was a world pandemic. So they couldn't have huge numbers of people coming and migrating at that period of time. And then as the pandemic has gone into endemic in certain parts of Australia, we had a change of government, and now they're having a migration increase. So you can kind of decide whether or not it's the new government of the day or whether or not it's a change in global circumstances that is driving that.
Right. Okay. So as you just said, during the pandemic, most of the countries, the migration level decreases. That brings this question that, let's say Canada or US or UK or other European countries, where the migration was happening, and it was happening in a full force. So in the global terms, comparing with other competitors of Australia, let's say US or Canada or UK, that they are the major competitors in the market to attract the migrants. Has Australia missed the bus?
As a professional, we would say that we keep missing a number of buses. We would like to see improvements.
Yes.
And, I can certainly see the department has improved things. Say in the past 6 months, we're seeing faster decisions being made where the government I think it was October or November, I think it was October of last year, the Ministerial Direction 100, that gave some more clarity to visa decision makers in the department which visas they should focus on, because during COVID it was all a bit all over the shop. Now they've had some more direction, which for us as professionals means we have more advice that we're able to give clearly to our clients about their migration pathways. And I'm seeing faster visa decision makers, faster than there has been in a few years. So that's a really good outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. 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 Excellent. Thank you for that. That was the main question asked. Okay. While I was watching one of your videos, and you mentioned in one of your short video on YouTube that the cycle of migration. where you gave an example of hairdressers, where they're saying that, you said that that happens. A student come here, they decide to study something, and then meanwhile they finish their study, then the course is out of the skill list. So they
Hmm.
miss out on those opportunities for, going for the skill migration and all that. So when an applicant applying for a visa from overseas or within Australia, let's say from overseas, that's a base case scenario. When someone is applying for the visa, what are the main aspects they have to keep in their mind? Whether it's a student, whether it's a migrant, whether it's a working holiday, anything. If they're applying for any sorts of visa, what should they think before applying for a visa, Australian visa?
Yes, I would say for for us giving professional advice, the most important thing is to know what is your immigration goal. If your goal is 100%, I want to migrate to Australia on a permanent basis, make Australia my home, then you need to be really clear on the pathways that are available to you. Um, and this is why in my podcast, Making Australian Migration Easy, I have broken it down into sort of broad sectors of agriculture, childcare and education, construction, healthcare work, hospitality, and information communication technology. Those particular industries, and there's many different occupations that fall under those broad categories, have consistently had permanent migration pathways. So that's why I've sort of come up with those six with my knowledge of what I've seen sort of over, prior to being in the immigration department. I actually had a little over 20 years, giving away my age, in Australian government policy experience, but
Yeah.
consistently those particular areas have had available pathways. So if you are minded to just say, right, I just definitely want to come to Australia and study something, if that's your goal, then I would be looking at which particular sectors you're going to so that you know you have a clear migration pathway, and always seek professional advice from someone who has that understanding of the government policy and changes and can give you really informed advice. I'll see there were a number of people when I was in the student visa compliance who would fall into traps because they sort of went for what was the cheapest and quickest deal, thinking, I just need to get my visa extended. It's like, well, that's great, but now you've paid big international fees, and that particular course that you did doesn't lead to anything skilled. So, really understand what your skills mean in terms of Australian migration and where they're going to be needed, before you start going down your pathway of studying in Australia.
Right. So you're saying that a professional advice from an experienced person or whoever is professional in the field is kind of necessary before making a decision, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I
Right.
think you and I would have heard many times from clients, but I heard that, and I had a friend that, and I had a family member that, and I was
That
reading on
friend
social
and
media
family
and
of
I
mine.
saw this blog, and it's like, oh, but that's not advice. They're not professionals. They don't know how to navigate the Australian migration laws. So
Correct, correct.
it really helps to understand from someone who's seen, even even as professionals, we'll have clients come to us for say assistance going to a tribunal because they've had their visa refused because they didn't understand the rules. And that's, some of our knowledge actually comes from other people's mistakes. We can advise you because we've seen where the mistakes are, so we've got a good understanding to let people know, no, no, you don't want to go that way, go this way, and here's the reasons why. So that, yeah, professional advice from either a registered Australian migration agent or someone who is an Australian lawyer, absolutely essential. Otherwise, you're taking big risks with your migration pathway.
Correct. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah. Thank you for that. So you've been in a legal profession for that long years. You said you just gave 20 years to Australian policy making and all that. So being a policymaker, being a lawyer, how was your own journey in Australia? You've been Australian. You're an Australian-born child. Are you a migrant by any chance? Your parents migrated to Australia or something, or your parents are based in Australia as well?
So, my father was actually Nigerian. He has since passed, but a different migrant story. My parents met in Moscow. So, my mother is Australian, my father was Nigerian, and they met in Moscow. So, this
Right.
is a
Great.
very international product here now in
Correct.
Australia.
Great. 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 Great.
But
So perfect.
having, I think, the mixed cultural background, and particularly because I'm from both a Western and Eastern type of culture, it helps me to understand clients and what their expectations might be from their own lived experiences, and then being able to frame it in such a way that they can understand how then they can navigate coming to Australia, because Australia is all the better for having more migrants. I went to last year. I don't know if you had the pleasure of going to Hobart to a migration conference, and saw the immigration minister there. And there was also talks about the benefits of migration there, and they looked at a cycle of food. Let's just look at food. Australia, you can eat around the world in one
Great.
suburb, and that
Yes.
that that is because we've had such fantastic migration here,
Great.
and I wouldn't have it any other way.
No, that is the beauty of Australia. Like, you live anywhere, Sydney, Melbourne, anywhere, any major cities, or even in a countryside as well. You feel that multicultural vibrancy everywhere, and that's the beauty of this country. So, of course, yes, it is a great country. So overall, as a policymaker, or as a lawyer, or as a founder of a migration firm, what you see the future of Australian migration, how it will be benefiting the country.
Look, Australia, one local example that I like to look at right now. So we've got the 2032 Brisbane Olympics that are going to happen. And internally within Australia, we're seeing migration from the southern states up to Queensland, which is where I live. And that's only going to continue to grow. We don't have enough housing, and the infrastructure also needs to continue to be expanded and improved upon. All of those things, we don't have the skills here. We need more
Mm.
people. We need more people to work in construction. And when you have the infrastructure that grows, you will need more healthcare, because there is a higher population that requires the healthcare and the support in those industries. And then those people all have children. And so then education also needs to grow in line with that. And tourism and hospitality is a massive part of that as well. So there are more tourism and hospitality roles that continue to grow. If we have a look at the population only 20 years ago versus today, we're having some birth rates, but migration is also making a huge contribution to that. We are a huge landmass, but there is still more room. But we need people to come here to help build it.
Correct. Absolutely. So, what could be the future projection for the population? I would say, let's say next 20 years or 30 years. What is? Do you have any insight that Australia is aiming for? Right now, we are two and a half, 25 mil, right? So, what? Yeah. So, what will be the future projection in next 20, 30 years? Is there any number?
There are some numbers, and sorry, I don't have those to hand. But if we look at the economy of Australia, which is quite strong, there are
Mhm.
predictions that within about 10 years, we may be the strongest economy. So
Wow.
that's quite insightful. And as said, the statistician who was giving that talk at the migration conference, you need to have migration to continue to have the economy growing and on track. International education, it's of a high standard, but we, need to continue welcoming more people through those programs. In order to keep up with that, I think that we'll continue to see more red tape being removed, because we can't keep up with the volume with the way that the processes are happening. I think people do like the fact that there is good governance, and that that people's identities and their qualifications and so on are being properly verified, but I think it needs to be done in a speedier way, which means that Australia will continue to improve its linkages across different levels of government, and also in our communications and sharing with other governments across the world.
Excellent. Absolutely, you're right. This question you can choose not to answer. That's okay. But this is a question from many clients. So question is, there are a lot of delays happening in the department. Uh, what happens? Like, is those application are stored and not even looked at? Is that instructions given to the case officers, or there are less case officers who can't cope with the workload? What is the actual behind the scene thing that is happening? So because of the delay, say 3 years delay, 4 years delay for partner visas, general skill migration, 491, 189, not 189, but at least 489, 887, those applications are sitting there for long years. So is that not, it's been told to the case officer not to even look at them, or there is a lot of other applications are coming in, and that is why the case officers are busy and they can't even look at them?
Mm. So I think a lot of that was, well, COVID had happened. The
Yeah,
department had to decide which areas does it focus on.
right.
So we're aware that the department has recruited. I think it's now heading towards, they were trying to get to around 600 additional visa decision makers, which sounds magical, but you can't just drop in people who, have a little matrix chip of all of the how to assess a visa application and deliver a decision. And this was where some of the work that I did came in. There needs to be solicitors, first of all, who are trained on administrative law, visa decision making, and then they need to be able to, with the recruitment process, actually give decision making training. Visa decision makers can come from a range of backgrounds
Hmm.
themselves, educationally, culturally, but they will all be part of the Department of Home Affairs, which means they have to be Australian citizens if they're going to be
Citizens.
working here in Australia, and they will need to be supervised and trained. The department then needs to decide, with the resources that they've got, where they're going to allocate the prioritisation. Ministerial Direction 100 gave clarity with the Minister of the day. This is where I want you to focus on bolstering the decision making processing timeframes. With those other sort of legacy cases, I think those visa subclasses are no longer available for people to apply for. So when the department or the government has made a decision to wrap up a certain visa subclass, that is an indication that there is a different policy thinking happening. Um, and so that was why they were not prioritized so much. But then obviously that does create understandably, people then mistrust the department and its capacity. Even if they're applying for a different visa, they're not seeing that this is a different type of visa. That relationship and the trust gets broken a little. So after COVID, the change of government, they've come in and they've seen that. There are now dedicated officers to actually getting decisions from that backlog of cases out now. Anecdotally, I'm hearing from people that decisions are now coming out from those legacy caseloads. The difficulty is that because we have skilled shortages that are here right now, present right now for certain occupations, they also have to have visa decision makers who will quickly get through those. So they're working on the back to the front, and that means then there's people going, this isn't fair. I was lined up first of all. So, yes, I understand. But the government looks at it and says, but these are the skills that we need right now. So I think they're juggling a difficult line with the resources and trying to train new people into that process at the same time.
Excellent, excellent. So yes, I was about to ask you this question, like if someone, because I've got some Australian citizen friends, and they just asked me like how to become a visa officer, the case officer, and I haven't had the answer. So, but you've already answered the question. Thank you for that. So I can advise them if they want to be, a legal background is the first qualification they have to have, or it's not mandatory. How that works?
No, interestingly, there were not a lot of people who were legally trained who were visa decision makers. Um, it wasn't part of the recruitment strategy. There, the people who train the visa decision makers in a large part, so on the legal frameworks and the administrative law, someone like myself and my colleagues, we have to be solicitors. So we're lawyers, but a lot of the other trainers and so on may come from the policy areas or be people who have been trained themselves in the past. And there's different modules that people need to do of the training. So one side is the legal side and the advice and the decision, but then there's a lot of systems and processes and background checks that I guess we need to try and educate our clients and to give them appreciation. Some countries there may be further security checking. There can be further checks going on in the background for documents, certainly the police checking, or if there have been certain activities such as wars and other things, even if someone has given service, they will need to do further background checking into every individual who is in that application. And sometimes, if they've got family members who have been involved in certain things, that is happening in the background, and it can be at the overseas posts. It's not something that the visa decision makers are going to be um, able to communicate to us, though, because those particular things are, I guess, administrative decision making, and some of them have national security connotations. So there just needs to be a bit of an appreciation that those things are happening, and the visa decision makers will often have to refer parts of the decision off to different areas for clearance for things like character and health and so on.
Right. So this is commonly seen that sometime the case officers makes a decision, and the applicant applies to the further appeals, let's say AAT or the federal court or something. And if the AAT find out, or the federal court find out the decision has made wrongly, it was an error from the decision maker's sides. Is there any impact on an individual's career as a decision maker?
So I also worked in an area which was, this was a focus on protection visas, but it was quality assurance. So, with the quality assurance role, what I would do is take a random sample of decisions and evaluate them. And from that, I wouldn't know the name of the officer, but we would have numbers allocated to the officer. So, if there was consistent administrative issues that were picked up against that person's number, it would be reported back for recommended training.
Hmm.
So that means the person then it's like, well, there's been some issues with some of your decisions. You now need to go and do some further training in these particular areas. And certainly, if there was flagrant breaches or anything like that, then there could be serious performance management, or someone could be moved on if it was. Sort of deceitful behaviour. Fortunately, I guess within the department context, the only time where we saw that was in overseas posts, and it was contracted people who maybe within their
Right.
own um, cultural practices, it may have been all right to just go and pay someone for this or pay someone for that, and they may have tried that at post. It then
Yeah.
comes up later in the person's visa once they're in Australia, and that causes problems for them. And so, certainly, the department is constantly reviewing those kinds of outcomes as well.
Wow. Wow. Pretty great insight. Yeah. Thank you so much for everything. See, this is some those questions. Even I didn't knew the answers. When people ask me, and I ask on their behalf. So yes, pretty great answers, and thank you for joining us in today's episode. And it's insightful information you have given us from your end, from your experience, 20 years with working in a legal industry, and it is amazing to have a knowledge like that. And my questions will never end if I keep going on. But the time does not permit us, and yeah, we have to consolidate. But do you want to tell our audience or your audience, whoever's watching this video, before we consolidate our session?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess there's two things. The first thing, Australia wants and needs you. Please find a way to come here. And the second thing would be get the right advice from a qualified, registered Australian migration agent or a qualified Australian immigration lawyer to make sure you do it the right way.
Perfect. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that. And thanks again, Rhea. I can't thank you enough for taking this valuable hour from your busy schedule and joining with us. I appreciate a lot. And even my audience will also appreciate your insightful advice to everybody. Thank you so much for joining. And whenever you get a chance, we welcome you again. Please let us know. The questions will be endless, and we can accommodate your session anytime.